I have some fascinating video to dig into today. Donald Trump has been having trouble on the issue of race lately. Donald Trump's reaction to huge national protests against police brutality after George Floyd was killed by police was to say, send in more force and have the military dominate the protesters. That was the word he used last week or the week before on a call with governors. So it's obviously not going well for Trump on race. Donald Trump is polling 8% with black voters, 8%, according to a new CNN poll. So someone got the bright idea. Let's send Trump to be interviewed on Fox News, but not by one of their ubiquitous white blonde anchors. Have black woman Harris Faulkner interview Donald Trump. This is going to be great. It's going to help him with black voters. It was absolutely and utterly insane. And I want to look at some clips with you today. Here's Trump pulling out the cringeworthy claim about him doing more for black people than any other president. And he weirdly says, let's not include Lincoln in that. Although he adds, it is questionable how much Abraham Lincoln really did for black people, to which even Fox News anchor Harris Faulkner has to say, well, we are free, Mr. President. Like Lincoln freed the slaves. You've done more for us. Check out this first clip and strap in, folks, because it's going to be wild.
Yeah. In general, I mean, the economy is the great unifier, right?
So, I think I've done more for the black community than any other president. And let's take a pass on Abraham Lincoln because he did good, although it's always questionable. You know, in other words, the end result.
Well, we are free, Mr. President.
But we
he
are
did
free.
pretty well.
You understand what I mean?
Yeah, no,
so I'm
I
going to take a pass on Honest Abe, as we call him.
But you say you've done.
Absolutely bizarre. This is the president talking like this. And he doesn't even have the historical understanding to be able to recognize how cringy this is. Like, it's total cringe, but he doesn't get it because he lacks historical knowledge. Trump, who has defended Confederate monuments, says he's done more for black people than any other president. So then we get into the meat of it, as it were, related to the protests. And Donald Trump says, and this really requires some deep thinking to know, what on earth is this guy talking about? Trump says that police chokeholds as a concept are innocent and perfect. Innocent and perfect. And then he totally dissembles into nonsense.
I really am. And I think the concept of chokehold sounds so innocent, so perfect. And then you realize if it's a one-on-one, now if it's two-on-one, that's a little bit of a different story, depending on the toughness and strength. You know, we're talking about toughness and strength. We are talking, there's a physical thing here also. But if a police officer is in a bad scuffle and he's got somebody,
Well, if it's a one-on-one fight for the life,
yeah, and that does happen, and that does happen.
But
so you have to be careful.
What is he talking about? I'm not asking rhetorically. What is he talking about? Now, understand that there are lots of Republicans who will say only 8% of black voters support Trump because they've been somehow tricked by Democrats or they've fallen for something, which implicitly suggests black voters are dumb, that they've been tricked by Democrats. Watch this interview and you understand why Trump is polling 8% with black voters. Here's more about chokeholds. Trump saying sometimes bad people, something chokeholds are good. That's, I mean, I have a hard time making more sense out of it than that.
Say no
and
to
I don't
chokeholds?
want to see mistakes. Yeah, I don't like chokeholds. Now, I will say this. As somebody that, you know, you grow up and you wrestle and you fight and or you see what happens. Sometimes if you're alone and you're fighting somebody who's tough and you get somebody in a chokehold, what are you going to do? Say, oh, and it's a real bad person, and you know that. And they do exist. I mean, we have some real bad people. You saw that during the last couple of weeks. You saw some very good people protesting, but you saw some bad people also. And you get somebody in a chokehold, and what are you going to do now? Let go and say, oh, let's start all over again. I'm not allowed to have you in a chokehold. It's a tough situation. Now, if you have two people,
or
and in the case that we're talking about,
right,
you had four people.
Yeah.
And two of them, I guess, just pretty much started.
So
it's a very tricky situation. But
that's an
so the
interesting
chokehold
point.
thing is good because to talk about, because off the cuff it would sound like absolutely. But if you're thinking about it, then you realize maybe there is a bad fight, and the officer gets somebody in a position that's a very tough position.
So you say it's a sliding scale depending on what the circumstances are.
I think you have to probably say.
Do you want to be in that conversation?
It's just not of this world. There's nothing there. There's no substance there to even really analyze. Another absolutely Looney Tunes moment from this interview. they get into the phrase Trump used: when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Trump used this phrase during the protests recently. The origins are a guy named Walter Headley, the police chief of Miami, Florida, who said it in the 60s when there was a violent outbreak of crime. And it has a horribly racist history. It was positioned against the battle for civil rights in the country at the time. And Trump was asked about the origins, and he kind of plays dumb. He's like, well, other people also said it, like Philly Police Commissioner Frank Rizzo used the term. Now, Rizzo did not actually use the term, but he did encourage brutal police tactics. And Trump just kind of says, like, well, Rizzo also said it, which is not technically true. And then it gets just really awkward. If you have an aversion to awkwardness, I would maybe skip the next 2 minutes.
Me and I'm Harris on TV, but I'm a black woman. Yeah. I'm a mom. And, you know, and you've talked about it, but we haven't seen you come out and be that consoler in this instance. And the tweets, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Why those words?
So that's an expression I've heard over the years. And
do you know where it comes from?
I think Philadelphia, the mayor of Philadelphia,
no,
from what
it comes from 1967. I was about 18 months old at the time. Everybody's shooting Wiki because they probably got it wrong. But it was from the chief of police in Miami. He was cracking down, and he meant what he said. And he said, I don't even care if it makes it look like brutality. I'm going to crack down when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Yeah. That frightened a lot of people when you tweeted
well,
that.
It also comes from a very tough mayor who I might have been police commissioner at the time, but I think mayor of Philadelphia named Frank Rizzo. And he had an expression like that. But I've heard it many times from, I think it's been used many times. It means two things, very different things. One is if there's looting, there's probably going to be shooting, and that's not as a threat. That's really just a fact because that's what happens. And the other is if there's looting, there's going to be shooting. They're very different meanings.
Oh, interesting.
No, there's very different meanings. But I think.
Do you think most people see it that way?
I think they see it both ways. No, I mean, I've had it viewed both ways. I think it's meant both ways.
Can anybody understand what he's talking about? Like, literally, what is he saying? I'm feeling like my grammatical knowledge of English is not up to par to properly parse what Donald Trump is trying to say here. So let's now go backwards a little bit. I'm going to go back to the start of the interview with Harris Faulkner. And Trump characterizes the protests really as riots and unnecessary. Of course, they were mostly peaceful protests, and they were totally warranted given the inaction on police brutality for so long. Just completely dismissive Trump is of the entire movement. Not exactly an opportunity for a big coup with black voters.
It's happened in the last couple of weeks. I feel like we are at one of those historical moments where future generations will look back and they'll decide who we were. Are you the president to unite all of us, given everything that's happening right now?
Well, I certainly think so, and I certainly hope so. And the relationships we have are incredible. The spirit of this country, and especially considering what happened. I mean, we had out of nowhere a plague come in from China. It just came in, and it came to all over the world. It went all over the world. You look at it, 186 countries, and they were devastated. And we were certainly hit very hard. Some were hit harder than us, relatively, but we were hit very, very hard. And now we're making our comeback. And then on top of it, we had the riots, which were unnecessary to the extent they were. If the governors and mayors would have taken a stronger action, I think the riots would have been, you could call them protesters, you could call them riots. They were different nights, different things.
Says riots again, says you could call them protests, but they're really riots. And then following up this dismissiveness with even more, remember, they sat him in front of Black Fox News anchor Harris Faulkner, I guess as part of the optics here, and he just says horrible things. Here Trump says lots of the protesters didn't even know why they were protesting, which is just completely dismissive of the movement.
When he called out mom on that tape, it's a heart punch. So I'm curious from you, what do you think the protesters, not the looters and the rioters, we're intelligent enough to know the difference in our country, sure, right? What do you think they want? What do you think they need right now from you?
So I think you had protesters for different reasons, and then you had protesting also because, they just didn't know. I watched it very closely. Why are you here? And they really weren't able to say, but they were there for a reason, perhaps. But a lot of them really were there because they're following the crowd. A lot of them were there because what we witnessed was a terrible thing. What we saw was a terrible thing. And we've seen it over the years. We haven't, this was one horrible example, but you've seen other terrible examples. You know that better than anybody would know it.
Yes, Black woman Harris Faulkner would know better than anyone. But again, protesters didn't know why they were there, according to Donald Trump. So listen, you can find people who were out there who were just trying to cause trouble or going with the crowd. But the answer is the overwhelmingly peaceful protests were there because of police brutality. You say that first, not as an aside or at the end. Completely disastrous interview. But to totally level with you, I don't know that it matters. Anybody who would be disgusted with this interview is already not voting for Donald Trump. Anybody who just watches Fox News and gets in line and is planning to vote for Trump is going to vote for him anyway, regardless of this interview. So we've got to hit that slice who might change their minds. And I don't know that many of those folks are actually going to see this interview. It's tragic. It's sad because this is really exposing the lack of critical thinking and sort of thoughtfulness and introspection that Donald Trump experiences, a total lack of. And if you really sit down and listen to each of his answers, you understand the guy understands nothing. He just knows nothing. He doesn't even, he's there for a particular reason. There's a reason that with what's going on, he's being interviewed by Harris Faulkner, and he still fails to keep it together in the way that this type of strategy would hope that he would be able to do. Just absolutely insane. We're going to have more clips from this interview on the David Pakman Show Instagram, which is at David Pakman Show. On my Instagram, david.pakman, you can see me at a socially distanced outdoor cafe over the weekend. An incredible moment. I just sat down outside somewhere, and it felt like a huge thing. That's on my Instagram, david.pakman. We'll take a quick break and be back after this. Almost all American journalism is controlled by a few massive corporations, and News Voice is a one-of-a-kind mobile app that tracks the bias and corporate interests that infuse the news stories we consume every day, and it's totally free to use. It's a great tool to have on your phone. News Voice is not funded by advertisers or corporate investors. The platform is supported by contributions from users like you. The News Voice app will have some really excellent new features soon, specifically for the 2020 election, but they're wanting to expand their team of independent journalists. In order to keep everything running, they're offering special rewards to anyone who wants to give to their new Kickstarter campaign, which can be found at newsvoice.com/kick. Giving a contribution will come with rewards like insider access to group chats with News Voice staff members, as well as access to a variety of special features. Go see what News Voice is all about.